we have our very first speaker. Now, Miriam Suzanne, this talk is a dive into the origins of the web and CSS in particular, the design constraints, the range of strange proposals, and how the heck we got where we are today with this weird language that everyone loves and loves to hate in some ways too. Miriam is an artist. She's an engineer. She's an open web advocate. She's a co-founder of Oddbird, which is an incredible agency. She's an invited expert on the W3C CSS working group and SAS core contributor. But more than that, I consider her a friend of mine and a mentor, and I couldn't be happier to introduce her here at Smashing Magazine with Meets Modern CSS. So welcome, Miriam, to the stage. So I'm excited to see you.
Good to see you.
Miriam is going to be so tired of me by some point in time. I feel like we've been as a lot this week. But
Without it.
Oh gosh, I'm going to show up on your front doorstep one day, and you're going to go, "Oh gosh, get out of here." Let me just remind you how awesome Miriam is. You know, she's an artist. She's an engineer, an open web advocate, co-founder of Oddbird, invited expert to the W3C working group, SAS core contributor. I cannot, string together more impressive, list of things as you do. You really are a good friend, Miriam. You're a mentor of mine, and I'm really excited to see what you have to present to us today. So I just welcome you up to the stage.
Thank you so much. All right, here we go. We're going to talk about CHSS, the Cascading HTML style sheets, which were proposed by Holcomb Lee in 1994. You can still go read the original email where he proposed CSS, and it's a fascinating read. I highly recommend it. And it's not too long. Go for it. And not too technical either. But it wasn't the first proposal for styles on the web, and it wasn't the only proposal by a long shot. There are a bunch of proposals. You can go read all of them. But it was a special proposal because it solved a major problem for the new platform. Not a technical problem, but a philosophical problem. Political, like all the decisions that we make when we're designing a new platform or interface. Because technology is always political. Just ask these assholes. So the first web browser, the Hypermedia www browser and editor, you could edit web pages through it as well, was developed by CERN for the Next machine. And it uses this fancy graphic interface, but you can't make a web that's worldwide by saying it works on my machine and everyone else is an edge case. So they hired Nicola Pello to develop the second browser, the line mode browser. It's text only. You don't even have to install it. You can just telnet into the CERN servers, and any device with an internet connection can now go online and surf the web. This becomes the mission statement of the W3C, web for all, web on everything. And everything is a lot of things. And we don't necessarily know the size of the screen or even if there's a screen. There's also screen readers, which have a screen and then read it, which is a little bit of a mixture. And I guess AI slap summaries generated by a monopoly that will do anything to keep you from clicking on one of the links they exist to provide. But if we really want this to work, a web that is for everyone, on everything, that leads to some interesting constraints. And they're documented on the original website. This is the first website, probably frozen a couple years in, but it's still online. You can go read this as well. You can find the whole history of the web on the web, which is pretty cool. But browsers are meant to ignore code that they don't understand, both individual attributes and entire elements. Let's see here. So here we have some fake attributes, some fake elements, more fake attributes, lots of fake HTML in here. And the browser does just fine moving ahead and rendering what it understands. And that's an important feature of the web to make it compatible across all devices. That's why we can still see the first website on modern browsers, and we can load our modern websites on the first browser. Remy Sharp maintains this emulator of the first browser, and you can still go and play and see what your site looks like. We won't get any images because there was no image tag in the first browser, no CSS, but all the text is there. And that's the important thing about the web. We protect the content at all costs. Whatever else happens, browsers should keep that core content intact. The code is optional. The content is essential. And that's a fundamental building block of this language, of this platform. So this becomes an even bigger problem for design specifically, because it requires that HTML, if we want HTML to be a common language between all platforms, that implies no device-specific markup or anything which requires control over fonts or colors. That's what Sir Tim wrote in like 1990 or something. He already knew web design will never happen, at least in the sense we mean, graphic design. All the browsers had style sheets internally. The problem isn't styling documents on the web. That's easy to solve. Even the text-only browser, the line mode browser, has all caps headings and space between paragraphs, and this generated content showing these numbers where there would be a link, so you can just type the number instead of using a cursor. So every browser has styles, but every browser has its own styles, and you can't, as the author, provide any additional styles on top of that. So all websites look the same in a browser and different across browsers. So again, digital styles, not a difficult thing to solve. PostScript had already been around for almost a decade. That's the language behind PDFs. They give authors much more control, allowing us to create fully designed documents using just code, exactly what we would expect from a web design language. And with PostScript, we can describe every aspect of the page in detail. Like a print designer, we have control of everything. We can set the size of the page and it stays that way. It's just one size forever. In print design, we can also go on to be like exactly what ink to use and what paper to print on. And then we can send it to the printer, and what we get back is exactly what we printed. And you can click on it all you want, and it just sits there. We have complete control in these systems, but that control comes at a cost. So the page, whether it's print or PDF, is a static medium. It can't adapt to context or preferences. And that's a limitation of the page. When we have those fixed pages, they can't do as much. The web is meant to be different. So on the web, even static sites aren't static. What we ship is not always what the audience sees. Things can load differently in different browsers on different devices with different interfaces, and styles have to adapt to all those different situations. So the web is responsive to context, not just the width of the viewport, but also user needs and preferences, device interfaces, changing capabilities over time, and then more and more and more and more and more content, also changing all the time. And all of these variables, because we're not alone here, we're part of an ecosystem on the web, and our decisions impact other people. So on the web, we don't get final say. We're collaborating with the browsers. Like you saw, they can provide their own style sheets, and they're sort of instructed to ignore us when they don't understand what we're talking about. We're collaborating with them. We're also collaborating with our users who interact with our sites, wearing their very cute tool belts. I hope everybody who is surfing the web wears a tool belt. They're on their own chosen devices with varying capabilities. They've chosen their own browser. They're setting their user preferences and so on. And then maybe we're collaborating with aliens, who knows? They're probably just trying to get home. So that's good. Okay, so we're trying to do graphic design of unknown content with unknown collaborators on an infinite and unknowable canvas across operating systems, interfaces, languages, and writing modes. This is absurd. How are we supposed to do this? So under those constraints, it's reasonable that design seemed impossible, but nobody was really happy with that outcome. When every site looks the same, that's boring, both for authors who want to be expressive and for people surfing the web. in their tool belts, who want a more exciting, visually exciting and interesting web. So there's a turning point in 1993 when Mosaic added the image tag to HTML. This is before web standards, so they just did it and then emailed the listserv and said, here's our new browser. It has images and a bunch of other stuff that you didn't ask for. And suddenly web design is possible. You can just put everything into an image like they did here. And it never changes. It's just like print design. The image is static forever. It's one size. Maybe it will load in your browser, maybe it won't. And then we just lose everything that makes HTML special, because we can't protect structured content inside of an image. If it doesn't load, it's lost. Clearly, we have a partial solution to this problem, but not a full solution. We still can't do structured content. So there was a real risk here in 1993 that the web would become a giant fax machine where pictures of text would be passed along. And we lose all of that responsiveness that makes the web special. And people were worried about that. And so you'll notice that most of these design proposals come around 1993 and 1994. This is a group of people trying to save the web from images. We need some sort of web design that doesn't break what makes HTML special. We need to take HTML to the max. That's the name of one of the proposals. So one of the first proposals here is from Peiwei's Viola browser. And this is actually the style sheet language that his browser used internally, and then was the first browser to make styles available to authors using his language. You can see a lot of familiar things here. There's sort of selectors. There's even nested selectors, that H1 and H2, those are inside the head and the body. And then we've got property and value pairs. So fairly familiar. This is about a year before CSS was proposed. Robert Reich has this easily parsable format. This was released several months before, but this was proposed several months before Viola. I assume he means parsable by machines, because it's hard for me to parse. That first line there of the defaults is that the font family equals times spacing is something, size is 14th, we equals me. I don't know, that sounds like a Beatles song. Robert is clear that these styles are only suggestions. Times is not meant to be a font name per se. We're not necessarily asking for the Times font, but it's a suggestion of a style of character representation. We want something like Times. And we hear this language over and over in all of the proposals. We're not writing rules. We're writing suggestions or hints about the behavior that we want. Sometimes in all caps, hints and suggestions, which might or might not be used. The other proposals all pick this up. John Bosack's hints that will degrade in a controlled way, or with a CHSS proposal, attaching style hints that the browser may or may not use. We want to give authors some stylistic influence without resorting to page description languages like PostScript, without giving full control to authors, because we need that responsiveness. So we use the same resilient language that we saw earlier. In the same way, our CSS can include all sorts of fake code, and it is simply ignored by the browser. It's too bad that we don't have emotions tearful. I'm still hoping that the working group will pick that one up, and maybe a sludge color. In CSS, recovers fairly well from whatever we throw at it like that. And that, again, allows us to add new features and have them work in some browsers and not others. The goal is always that content should be viewable and accessible by default. This becomes another design principle of the W3C, which is why the default overflow is visible. It's so that if we get cocky and we try to shove a bunch of large text into a small box, I don't know what we were expecting, the browser will try to bail us out, not because it's the best looking solution, but because it's one where all of the content remains visible, and that's the purpose. InDesign doesn't worry about this at all. They just figure you'll go back and fix it after you see it broken in the proof. And because in InDesign, you export and it's done and it's the same everywhere, that's fine. On the web, you export and it is different everywhere. And so we need a default that will fix problems you didn't catch. So print is unchanging, unaware of context, unable to adapt. And by getting all that control, we get those features. But by giving up that control, we get to collaborate. The web is able to carry our designs farther than we could go alone because we're not alone. So while CHSS wasn't the first proposed style sheets, it didn't invent selectors or properties or even inheritance. Payway had that as well. It was the first to suggest collaboration, and an equal collaboration designed to soften the tension between the author and the reader by giving them the same syntax. So authors like us want to show our creativity or our branding, provide a distinct look and feel, make the document visually interesting, but then users will have preferences that will make things more similar. They'll say, I want all of the font sizes to be larger or something like that. So there's this balance that we need to get. And that sort of agency is at the foundation of the design of CSS. Despite what we're told today by massive platforms, user agency is useful and important and something that we should believe in and push for. The idea that we should be excited about robots making decisions for us all the time is corporate nonsense and fundamentally counter to the vision of the web. So we do this by allowing everybody to contribute styles written in the same language. So each of us is providing our hints as declarations, a property and a value, and then we can group those into selectors forming rule sets, which can be attached to an HTML document or chained together, resulting in an ordered list or cascade of style sheets. This is where the term cascade first appears. All of these styles being applied to the same website, but not in a coordinated way. Nobody in this system is talking to each other necessarily. The users have their preferences. We have our brand guidelines or whatever, and those two things have to get merged without us ever coming to an agreement on how exactly that should work. So this, of course, leads to conflicts. We have any number of declarations coming from different sources, likely applying different values to the same properties on the same elements. So we can set the background of a button to 6 different colors, potentially. And the browser needs to resolve those conflicts. Every CSS property, like background, on every HTML element, like a particular button, must have a single value. So every button needs one background color, one text color, one padding left, one margin inline end, and so on. There's like 560 of these or something. It's been a while since I checked. But to get there, we need some way to Thunderdome our declarations and choose a single winner. 2 styles enter, 1 style leaves. The simplest way to choose a winner would be to just take the last one. Last takes precedence. And we start there. We have that solution, but that's a bit simplistic. And somebody has to go first. So we have to choose who goes first and who goes last in this collaboration if we're using the order to determine a winner. Okay, we start with the styles that already exist in browsers. Browsers already are providing defaults. We'll start with those. They go at the bottom. They go first, least important. We'll call those user agent styles. The browser ought to be an agent of the user. They will provide legible defaults, and that's essential. You can't render text without styling it somehow. So we need to know like what the font is, how big it is. We need some defaults to make it readable. This clearly, since this is a proposal for CSS, it doesn't include CSS. Let's just open up our, you don't need to be able to read the text of it here, but if we go in and we say all initial, oh, I need to do that on not, I need to do that on everything. All initial. And there we go. We sort of get one big block of text. If I add importance, it'll go even a little bit farther, maybe. Nope. We're probably getting some breaks in there. I don't know. But yeah, not very readable to get the initial styles without some readable default from the browser. So we're getting initial values. The specification is defining these initial values, and they're the same across everywhere the property is used. So the initial value of display is always inline. If you go to a div and you say display initial, you will get an inline div. The background, the initial background is always transparent. The initial color is canvas text, and so on. But the browser is coming in and saying, okay, but a lot of these things shouldn't be always inline. We should have some other setting for them. So we can see here, even the browser is hiding the title, and the title shows up when we do display initial. But the browser is providing that display hidden. So it's a big part of what browser style sheets do is they go through and set what we think of as the defaults for something. Display block and display none where they're needed, and then a bunch of other stuff like 8-pixel margins on the body, which we will all remove quickly, setting the links to be blue and underlined, making headings bigger, putting space between paragraphs, all that sort of stuff. You can go see Jens Mirt has, and sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that, has documented a whole history of the browser styles from different browsers. You can go check that out, but you can also find the Safari, Chrome, and Firefox browser styles. So after the browser, we allow the user to apply preferences. And again, we're thinking of preferences as working across all websites, similar to browser styles, and that makes them somewhat default-ish. So we let the user go and provide some more defaults, and then we'll come in and provide the page-specific styles. So originally, authors were using CSS syntax to do this as well, and that's still how it works in Safari. You can go into the advanced options and select a style sheet and load up your user styles. Most other browsers have moved to a graphic user interface, limited set of preferences that you can set through this form. But there are still some there, and you can still set them, and they sort of are just writing the CSS for you. It's applied in the same way. The details are a little bit different, but the results are the same. Users get to set some default preferences that are applied to every site that they visit. And to be clear, when we're talking about users or readers on the web, that's all of us, because we all use the web. I think it's safe to say that I use the web a lot more than I build the web. I am mostly a user of the web and sometimes also an author. So we can all have preferences. And I think it's great to have preferences, not just light mode and dark mode, but your favorite fonts, your font sizes, all of it. Go ahead. I used to worry that as a dev, like I would see something different from the average user, but that's the whole point. And I know what fonts I set and what default font sizes I set. And so when they pop up in a website, I see that I have that control, right? And I'm actually starting to understand more what a user might see by doing that. And it's fun to have my fonts pop up on Wikipedia or something and see that they're using my preferences there. Go ahead and make the web your own. I think that's what it's here for. So then the user agent and the user have applied their defaults. Finally, it's on us, the document author. We come last, and we get the highest priority because last takes precedence, and we override everybody. These are called the cascade origins, the three origins where a style sheet could come from. So we just get to come in with a lot of power and smear our designs all over everyone's wonderful defaults, or we throw a fit and stomp around force choking everyone and just ignore their preferences. But Hokum was clear that if conflicts arise, when it really matters, the user should have the last word. So this feels a bit backwards. This has also become a W3C principle. The priority of constituents. Always put user needs above all. So the original proposal included a percentage value here where everybody could express how much they care, how important their style is as a percentage on every declaration. And if the user requests 64% control, and it doesn't matter how much we ask for, if we come along and say, well, I want 100% control, it's too bad. There's only 36% left, so that's what we get. So this is like first come, first serve. Last takes precedence if they're at the same. Well, wait, well, how does that be? I don't know, but this would get very complicated, and there was immediately sort of questions about how this would work. Why are we getting a weighted average of our styles? So I want blue, but you asked for red, so here's the purple that no one asked for. And people immediately pointed out that if I wanted blue on yellow and you wanted yellow on blue, we'd get green on green. I wish we had tried a little bit harder to figure out, like, how do we get weighted averages of fonts, but here we are. We didn't do this. But I honestly love this final diagram in Hokum's proposal. He has this little ASCII art of a graphic interface with range sliders where the user would be able to fine-tune their design on every site by choosing the balance of the user style to the author style that they want. Live mixing websites, I think, is just a fantastic idea and something that we should do. But it was too complicated as a core feature of the language, and it was simplified to a binary option, 0% by default and 100% if we add the important flag. So the important, when we do add importance, we generate 3 new origins, and they always win over normal styles. So important styles always win over normal styles, but you can also see that there's 3 origins there, and they're in reverse order. So the user goes first and sets defaults, but if they mark as anything as important, that jumps down to the end and overrides everything before it. So the user agent can go first and last. User preferences are before us and after us, and our styles are just sort of stuck there in the middle. And we're sort of creating this mirror universe where everything is reversed and our evil twins have goatees. And yes, browser defaults use importance all the time, and user preferences. Users can add importance even in the simplified forms. Many of them will have a checkbox for like overriding or not overriding a website styles. And this is the purpose of importance. It doesn't change specificity, it changes the origin, and it changes the priority of the origins. So the purpose of it is not for us to fight with each other about how big the logo should be or whatever across our team, or angrily try to override the code that we wrote last year and can't find. The purpose of it is for users and browsers to protect styles from future origins. That's us, someone that might come along later and just ignore everybody and try to break everything. Importance exists to protect users from us. We're the bad guys. But the way that this works, we're sort of isolated there in the middle. So it's easy to start to think that importance is just a way of us increasing the specificity of something. We start to think that we're the center of the universe, when really we're just one pale blue dot over in the solar system of the Cascade, which rotates around user needs. It's fair. We deal with specificity every day, and we only deal with the rest of the Cascade if we're paying attention. But the Jedi uses Cascade for knowledge and defense, never for attack. So now we're not just dealing with some extreme unknowns, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, but the browser is allowed to ignore us, and the user can override anything we say. And there are just too many variables to consider, and everything we say is a suggestion, but everything we say is also a hint, telling the browser something about our intent. So we have this way of using subtext in a declarative language to express something more than just the declaration itself. So some declarations seem simple. The width of a box, 500 pixels. Some are more abstract, wrapping text so that it looks pretty. What does pretty mean? But even simple declarations contain subtext. What do we mean by a pixel? Should this box get smaller on a screen that has a higher resolution? How should it respond to zooming in and out? There's so many questions that we could ask about that 500 pixels. It's still not a static value. Are we setting the width of the content so that padding and border are added, or are we setting the width of the entire box so that padding and border are subtracted? Should it be based on context instead, a parent element or the viewport or a container, or flexible in relation to sibling elements and remaining space? Or should we look at the contents and use either the min or max size from the content itself? Or maybe we shouldn't even be thinking about width at all, but the inline size, are we talking about the direction that text flows? We could represent that too, or some combination of things. We could mix and match using various functions in CSS, like the minimum of 2 values. Everything in CSS is based on this constant back and forth of context pushing in, defining what space is available, and content pushing out, taking up that space. So how do we ensure that our content will fit any container we put it in? How do we provide styles that will give the browser enough information that it can adapt to all these different contexts without us having to design each one individually? Because we don't have all that information, we're not there when the user loads a website. We don't know the size of their browser. We don't know the interface they use, whether it's a mouse or a finger or something else. But the browser does know all that. It has all that context. So the most useful tools in CSS express this kind of abstract behavior where we sort of say, auto, you figure it out. Let the browser work out the details. And this makes sense to me. Like all design choices, our styles are contextual. Properties often behave differently or not at all, depending on other properties. So there's a lot of interplay in CSS between the different pieces. And as a result, CSS features tend to be intertwined. The behavior of one property is not isolated. It impacts other properties. In fact, CSS is very modal. Certain properties turn other properties on and off. So we're not really doing functional programming. What we do is more expressive, like poetry. We're not describing the page in step-by-step detail, but communicating high-level ideas through subtext. Not just the result that we want, but the intent behind each choice. And so units are great at this. And it's why CSS has so many of them. On the surface, we could say 1em is sometimes 16 pixels. And we sort of make that assumption because it's the default in most browsers. But they carry very different implications. They move differently. They adapt differently. So what looks good on one screen doesn't mean that we've solved the problem. Similarly, with layout methods, flex and grid can sometimes create the same layouts, but they move differently at the edges. And so when I'm choosing between these, I'm choosing based on how I want the things to move. Our job, the entire reason we're here, is not to make things look good on one device or in one single browser, but to design for that inevitable change, design for that chaos and inconsistency. The fact that we control the paper page is a limitation. By letting go of that control while expressing ourselves clearly by providing hints and suggestions, we can express what we want to the browser so that it can help us to adapt. So to me, this meme perfectly captures what is actually awesome about CSS and how we can go wrong by taking too much control without considering the consequences. So there's various ways that we could lighten our grip here. I mean, I would just solve it like that, and then we're done. But okay. I mean, one is, if we don't need to apply these set widths, that's great. Or if we want those to be the default, we could also set a min width to min content, or we could choose how we want to wrap overflow. And then we could choose how we want to clip with overflow, or we could say auto, that's going to give us some scrolling. We have lots of controls here, which we wouldn't have in InDesign, for example. Yeah, I love that demo because I think it shows us exactly what we're dealing with in this language and why. We're not alone on this platform, and everything about CSS is built around that political vision where we respect the user, and this is our job as designers, not forcing everyone into a singular experience, but setting up the circumstances for communication in an unpredictable world, adapting to incongruities and of human experience. So protect the content at all costs. Our job is to first not break this World Wide Web. Thank you.
I was muted. Holy smokes! Did I actually just witness that? That was like an incredible talk, Miriam. And also I'm trying to picture what my doppelganger evil twin looks like with a goatee. I'm guessing it's even scarier than this face is.
Hopefully next time you'll show us.
Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Now, no. Hey, first, thank you so much for this talk. You should just see the chatter in the chat just going off about how wonderful all of your references are, how just fluent you make the arguments, and that your points are just spot on. So thank you for that. I was wondering, I just want to take this idea of like we're collaborators on the web. We're not alone. But just like any working relationship, we can step on each other's toes and not exactly know whether or not we are doing that. So how do we know when we are stepping on the toes of browsers and users? And is there a way that we know how to draw a line as far as knowing how far we should take things as authors?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think about a lot. And for me, setting my user preferences was a way of discovering where all am I stepping on user preferences? Where can I let up on that? And where is it worthwhile, at least in the default sense? Like they can still override me with importance if they want to, but I will still set the fonts for my site, even though the user might have a default font. I think that's okay, but I will try not to step on their font size preference, for example. That seems more essential. And I'm going to get out of the way of that one, at least a little bit. I've been playing with that a lot lately. And setting my preferences is a way of finding those places. But then with the browser, we're used to doing the browser testing, at least testing different screens. I would say it's good to think about different interfaces. And in some of those situations, you don't have to, I mean, it's excellent when you can find the device and use it to do your testing. But sometimes you can say, okay, some devices don't support hover. I will just comment out the hover tag and see if my page still works. And we can do a lot of testing that simply.
That's really interesting just to think about that even there's this give and take. I mean, you talked about trade-offs in web design, and knowing that because we have some freedoms, we might have to exchange that for some trade-offs in the end.
Hmm.
I think that's an excellent point. And one of the things you demonstrated were how initial styles can override the user agent styles. You did that when you did the universal selector.
Uh-huh.
All initial. Were there any other interesting favorite nuggets that came up while you were researching, web history and some of the like funny things like for example, the title tag? I didn't realize that the title tag had CSS applied to it. That's a really
Yeah,
interesting thing.
everything in the head of your HTML file has everything in the document. We just by default get a tree of boxes. I think it's even called that in the spec.
Yeah.
The box tree, and then we apply every property to every box. I mean, there's a few nuggets that I take away from looking into those things, and like how all of it works. I mean, I really like the interactivity and stuff like that. But even just finding like at what point in the process of rendering a page do shorthands get broken apart into longhands? And it's early in the process. And sometimes shorthands will override longhand properties that they can't set. Like there will be background shorthand resets all background stuff, even the parts that you can't put in the shorthand. And what it says in the spec, there's good recommendations on when to use which. You should use the shorthand when you are starting over. When you want to clear the slate and do something new, use a shorthand property. That's what they're for. They do that. They clear out any previous instructions, ignore all previous instructions, and do this. That's what the shorthand is for. And if you want to not step on the previous instructions, then you should use the longhands. And so I finally had a clear understanding of when should I be using which of these.
It's funny because we always think of the ergonomics of typing shorter and fewer bytes just in general, or like a CSS golfing sort of experiment, right? But really, we're doing unintentional resets when we do that sort of thing.
Yeah, although now I use that intentionally, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I want to start a new background. I don't want any of the old background there. I just want to start over. So
now this also bleeds into some other work. I just have one more question for you, and that's this bleeds into your work with what you're talking about with shorthands with logical properties that use flow terms in them, such as inline direction, block direction.
mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because when we talk about a shorthand, there isn't exactly a one-to-one pairing between logical properties and what happens or gets rendered in the shorthand.
Yeah. So we've got, say, margin left, and we have margin inline start. And in English, those are going to be the same. In other languages, those are going to be different. So we can't reliably assume they're the same. But those two properties cascade separately. And only when the page is being laid out do we determine which one wins. And then they sort of do their own little cascade at the end to be like, oh, okay, you win this time. So that happens very late. But we also have this margin shorthand, and it sets the physical properties. It sets margin top, right, bottom, and left. I don't know why Bert and Hokum came up with that order. I don't think it makes sense in any way to do top, right, bottom, left. But we set those physical for, it's clockwise, but
clockwise,
you could go counterclockwise, and that would be just as easy to remember. I don't know. And then you would get start and start anyway. Because we already have that margin property and it already has a nice syntax of setting for values, there's not an easy way to take that now that we have logical properties and say we want to reuse that shorthand for logical properties. So there's lots of different discussions about the different approaches we could take to adding logical shorthands. Some way that we could say margin these four numbers, but make them logical instead of physical. There's various proposals, but right now it's held up in the working group for 3 years or so, because somebody has to go through all 560 properties in CSS and determine which ones would be impacted.
Oh my gosh.
And nobody wants to do that. So I'm volunteering to do that, except I don't want to just do it for free. I have an open collective you can support if you want to help unstick this.
We will post a link to that, because that's
Great.
noble work right there. If anyone understands going through 500 some odd properties just to find the needles in the haystack that are actually affected by this.
Yeah, and I'm tired of every year the internationalization working group comes to us and says, have you fixed this? And we have to just say, no, nobody wants to look into it. So I want to look into it. Help me look into it.
Just so folks know, the value proposition of inline or of logical properties in general is what again? Just so people know.
Yeah, so it means that we can basically. So this was I am a core developer on Sass, and it was one of the main features back in the day of any Sass library or Sass layout system was that you wanted the ability to like flip your website for right to left languages. And so we would build all these Sass tools around flipping your website right to left or left to right. And now you don't need that. You don't need build tools for that. The logical properties give you that automatically. And that's essential for websites that are building multilingual sites, especially multilingual in one page. But any sort of translations on your sites, it's not harder to write. You write the same amount of code and you get this magical ability for the page to readjust to different languages. But then it's also useful for people who are never thinking about or don't have the budget to do their own translations, because every website or every browser now provides built-in translations. When I load up a website that is in Hebrew or in Arabic, I get a little thing at the top of my browser that says, would you like this translated? And I can click yes. And if that site has been written using logical properties, everything will flip around exactly the way that it's expected. And that's super powerful. I want my site to be international in that way, even though I don't know Arabic. I want that to work. So I think that's a huge thing for a World Wide Web.
It's an accessibility feature in a sense, right? I mean, text has to be displayed and it has to be accessible. And then what I love about the idea of using logical properties is that, again, it's true to what you're talking about with providing the browser a hint. You're not being dictative of things. You're saying in one context to do this. If the context changes, here's how I'd like you to behave.
Right, and I find it's sort of more meaningful. I'm more getting to the point, because when I set the width of something, I usually mean I'm setting the length of the line of text. And if that's what I mean, I should not say width. I should say the inline size, because that's more meaningful. I'm providing more hints.
That's absolutely true. Miriam, just again, thank you so much for gracing us with the stage and for just knocking our socks off as you always do. I appreciate all the work you're doing in the community and for CSS as a language. I'm really excited to bring you back up for the panel discussion. So thank you so much for
always a pleasure. Excited to see everyone else here. So thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely.